All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Books and Books in Coral Gables. Thank you all for coming down tonight. Before beginning tonight's event, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence their cell phones. Also want to remind everyone we have events like this almost every night at Books and Books, and you can pick up a calendar of events at the counter. It's got highlights on the front and full calendars on the back. And if you'd like more information, you can always visit the website. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome back Mr. Arthur and Ms. Pauline Frommer, here to discuss major new developments in the world of travel. About Mr. Frommer, years ago in the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, Tom Swick wrote, "What Benjamin Spock was to child-rearing in the 50s and Alfred Kinsey was to sex, Arthur Frommer was to travel." Local travel author, social media professional, and he's a Frommer's author himself, here to introduce Arthur and Pauline. Please welcome to the microphone Mr. David Paul Appel.
Thank you, Victor. I'm David Paul Appel. I've been asked to introduce Arthur and Pauline because I've worked with them since 1997. I was executive editor of Arthur Frommer's Budget Travel and have authored Frommer's Guides to Costa Rica, as well as the new edition of Miami and the Keys, as Victor said. I'm also honored to call them dear friends and greatly admire their strong sense of ethics and compassion. In any case, the story of Arthur Frommer is now legendary. As a GI in 1955 in post-war Europe, he published a guidebook that became Europe on $5 a day, the seed for the Frommer series and brand that over the years has become the most trusted name in travel. And now, by prying that series and brand out of the clutches of its most recent owner, the mighty Google, Arthur and his equally talented daughter and successor, Pauline, have regained complete control over them for the first time in many years and are in the process of relaunching and reinventing them for 21st century audience and technologies. It's a daunting task, but they are definitely up to it. And without further ado, I'd like you all to join me in welcoming to Coral Gables in Miami, Arthur and Pauline Frommer.
Thank you. As some of you saw, our presentation kind of got destroyed, technical problems. So my father and I are going to wing this presentation tonight. As we do every week, we have a nationally syndicated radio show that people love to listen to because of how much we argue. So that may happen tonight as well. As David said, we reacquired the rights to the Frommer guidebooks in April of 2013, which means that it is a family-run business once again, and we are absolutely thrilled. We are also a startup, and that means that we have been so grateful for the help of dear friends in the travel business. In fact, Allianz Travel Insurance is underwriting this book tour. They are the reason we are here. So please give a round of applause to Allianz. We also have had great support from our friends in the travel agent community. And I'm not sure if they're here yet because everybody got stuck in traffic on the way here. But I know that Betty Shan and Tracy Manico from Cruise Planners are going to be here. So if you want to be planning a cruise, are you here? Yay, you made it. You should ask Betty, and we'll be talking about cruises later. I also want to give a shout out to our friends at the Bird Road Art District and the Bird Road Art Walk. Every time I come to Miami, I am astonished by how this city is blossoming and growing to be so much more than it was when I visited my grandmother here in the 1970s. It's become a major force for the arts and for culture, and the Bird Road Art District and the Bird Road Art Walk are two of the biggest players in that, along with your great new museums. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to try and do tonight. We often talk about when you should splurge on travel because doing so really improves your vacation, and when you should scrimp, because if you splurge, you're just a sucker in these cases. So my father and I are going to go back and forth. It'll be a counterpoint. We're going to be jostling from the mic, probably going to have a debate here because we don't agree on everything. Why don't I bring him up and he can introduce the first topic.
Thank you very much. It is always such a great pleasure to appear at this magnificent and glorious bookstore. And the word glorious is the only word that is sufficient to describe it. This is the great work of a man named Mitch Kaplan, who wanted to be here tonight. It is a community center. It is a center of learning, of debate, of ideas, and it always makes me excited to be here. Now, as Pauline pointed out, 3 years ago, I invited Pauline to be the co-host of a program that I was 5 years ago. And she came on to the first program and proceeded to disagree with me for 2 consecutive hours and to tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about. And I saw the reputation of 60 years crumbling around my ears. And then the people at the radio station said, "This was great radio. You should keep up." So we have decided very extemporaneously to do something tonight that we've only done once or twice in our entire career, several years ago, to talk about an item of great contention. Should you scrimp or should you splurge on different travel activities? And we're going to start probably with an activity on which, amazingly enough, we agree. And that is on the question of accommodations, because I feel very strongly that the most important thing to do in travel is to scrimp on accommodations and not to pay for the uniformed doorman at the curb who opens the door of the taxi cab when you stay at a first class or a deluxe hotel, or to pay for the beauty parlor and the barber shop and the gift store and all the rest, which is driving up the cost of your accommodations. In the last analysis, what is the purpose of a hotel is to provide you with a good night's sleep, and that can be done just as easily in a budget hotel as opposed to a first class or deluxe hotel.
Now,
one is, yes.
Can I just, the one
You're
place
interrupting too soon,
that
but
I would
nevertheless.
disagree
Yes.
is in those places where the resort itself is the vacation.
All right.
If you're going to a great city like Miami, you could stay anywhere. And I have to say, everywhere here is pretty darn expensive, even the budget accommodations. But if you're going to a place for the beach, then you might
I
splurge.
disagree even on that. I believe that what is important, that when the nighttime occurs and you slip beneath the covers of a bed, you do not know whether you are staying in a budget-priced or a deluxe hotel. What matters at that point is whether the linen is fresh and clean smelling, and whether or not the pillow is comfortable, and the mattress and the bed is comfortable. And it is vital that you scrimp and save on accommodations, which can save you so much of your travel budget. You can scrimp and save particularly effectively if you follow what is probably the single greatest trend in travel today, which is the substitution by millions of people of apartments and homes for a standard hotel. All over the travel industry, there have grown up companies that make available to you in every city of the world either a spare room in the apartment of a person who remains in residence while you go there, or in some cases an entire apartment for far less than you would ordinarily spend. Last week, when Pauline and I were on this media tour and staying in Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, either downstairs from or upstairs from a 2-family house. We paid $120 for the 2 of us, as opposed to the $300 that we would have spent at least, or the $400 that we would have spent had we gone to a hotel, because we made use of a company that has become a mighty force in travel, although it's one of several companies. It is called Airbnb, A-I-R, then the letter B, then the letter N, and then B, Airbnb, that now disposes of over 400,000 apartments scattered throughout the world that you can stay in If you need only a single bedroom, you many times operate this. You stay in or you occupy the spare bedroom of a apartment whose owner is in residence.
Which I did in Sacramento, paying $40 a night, which was $100 less than the cheapest hotel room.
Or if you require 2 bedrooms, you generally find that you are assigned to a 2-bedroom house. Now, the house may be in a modest neighborhood and it may be a modest house, and yet as modest as it is far more comfortable, far more spacious and ingratiating than any hotel. We had 2 bedrooms, we had a spacious living room, we had a complete kitchen, we were able to buy groceries and all the rest. I feel very, very strongly that one should scrimp on hotel accommodations by either using Airbnb or a company called Rentalo, Rentalo.com, which is very active in Europe, or you go to a giant company called HomeAway, headquartered in Austin, Texas, that is now traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It's become so heavily used. Or you go to a company called VRBO that my wife and I, who's here tonight, used a few months ago to obtain an apartment for our stay in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Can I add one?
Back to you, Pauline.
And there's also Wimdu, WIMDU. That's another one. This would have been on a screen behind us, so I apologize for you having to write this down. If you do decide to stay in a hotel, there are ways to save on hotels too. And the way you do that is you do a search of the companies that don't sell hotel rooms, but simply give you information on them. These companies include Hipmunk.com, HIPMUNK, Trivago.com. There's a very interesting one called Tingo, like being tingled, Tingo, which if the cost of your hotel stay drops, they refund you the difference in cost. Now, do they always have the cheapest hotels to begin with? Not always. They're much better for luxury hotels than they are for budget hotels. But if you're in the market for a luxury hotel, Tingo is quite good. And then there's always Global Freeloaders and Couchsurfing.com. These are ways to stay for free with people who love to welcome travelers into their homes. I have a friend who is a harpist, and she was in the national tour of South Pacific. And being a musician, she needed to save her money because she has no money. So she decided to use couch surfing for the 10 months that she was on the road. And every week she stayed with a different stranger around the United States. And she said of all those strangers, there's only one she really wouldn't want to meet again. And that's because he was kind of boring. But other than that, she has friends, she feels, across the United States. And like Airbnb, you write reviews of the travelers, and the travelers write reviews of the hosts. So you kind of know what you're getting into.
Okay. So far, in an unaccustomed manner, we have agreed, right? Let's get to an area of disagreeing, the choosing of cruises. There, in an unaccustomed field, I feel unhappily that it is now necessary to upgrade yourself from the basic level of cruise lines. It is important not to book a cruise aboard the ship lines that operate the standard mass volume cruises, Carnival Cruises, Royal Caribbean Cruises, Norwegian Cruise Line, and MSC Cruise Line. You will want to know that last week, the president of Royal Caribbean Cruise Line announced that his newest ship would provide bumper cars, a rink for bumper cars, all on the top deck of that ship, alongside a roller skating rink, alongside a basketball court, and alongside a simulated skydiving experience that through a strong vent of air would lift you 6 feet above the top deck of the ship. This is the most dramatic evidence of the fact that the entire cruise line industry,
not the entire, this level of the cruise
this
lines.
level of the cruise line industry is now run by avaricious, uncultured people who are hell bent on converting their ships into big amusement parks. I would not want to be on a cruise with people attracted to that cruise by the availability of bumper cars or of a basketball court, and yet this is what. Thank you very much.
Which cruise lines do you love?
Unfortunately, you have to spend a little bit more money and go on a cruise operated by Celebrity Cruises, as we did a few years ago, or on Holland America, or even on the premium ships that continue to offer the vaunted pleasures of a cruise line, the enjoyment of the vast expanse of the sea, the ability to enter into conversations with interesting people who are with you on the cruise, and not to people who have been attracted to the cruise by basketball courts and the like.
So I guess you're saying you would not want to travel with your grandchildren.
You got me there. You got
See,
me there.
I'm a mom, and we were on the Norwegian Gem recently, and my daughter, she was 9 then, or 8, she loved the climbing walls. She loved the indoor ice skating rink. She loved all these things. It was one of the best vacations she ever had. They had a great kids club, so I was able to spend some time alone. And you look at cruising, and it's really the best value in travel, except for national park vacations where you camp out. You can spend as little as $40 or $50 a night. That includes everything. You do have to have willpower, because once you're on board that ship, they're going to upsell you on everything. They're going to take pictures of you and try and get you to pay for them. But I think cruising is a great value, and my advice for booking a cruise is the most important thing is to go to a cruise agent. That is because every cruise line is different. And within the cruise lines, every boat is different. My father was speaking about Royal Caribbean. Well, yes, some of the Royal Caribbean boats have these incredible bells and whistles, but the older ones don't. So you need a cruise expert to help you figure out which would be the best boat for you. Also, cruise agents who sell a lot of cruises get special perks from the cruise lines that can save you money. For example, they can get free upgrades sometimes for their passengers. They can get shipboard credits. They can get you a bottle of wine in your room. So do use a cruise agent. That's the most important thing you could do, I think.
The reason why cruises are the best value in travel today is that the major cruise lines pay salaries of $50 a month to their room stewards and to their dining room stewards, a figure that is confirmed in a new book that was recently published by Elizabeth Becker of the New York Times called Overbooked, and does a job on the cruise lines. They have deliberately taken people desperate for income and made them dependent upon the tips that all of us leave when we book a cruise, which is a lesson to all of us that if we do book a cruise nowadays, we should be generous with our tips. But there is a moral issue that is at stake in the booking of cruises that are paying $50 a month. $50 a month, as unbelievable as that may sound to people who are working 10 weeks in a row without taking a day off, or working 12 hours a day and the long. Anyway, this is an area in which we disagree. I think, unfortunately, that you now have to upgrade yourself to a higher level of cruising in order to enjoy the traditions and the pleasures that people used to derive from cruises. Food.
Can you talk quickly about river cruises, which are booming?
River cruises. I loved my recent river cruise because of the age that I unfortunately now possess. And it was wonderful to be spending my time in a chaise lounge on the deck while the cruise ship went along at 4 miles an hour and the shore inched its way past us. I had a wonderful time. I was on the American Queen, and I read Mark Twain's Tales of the Mississippi during our visit, our cruise rather, going up the Mississippi River. But Pauline and her age group would be absolutely horrified by the pleasures of a so-called river cruise. They are, however,
done this in Europe too,
and I've done this in Europe. What's wonderful about the cruise line, the river cruises in Europe, is that the chefs and kitchen staff are all European, and the food is magnificent. You have You have bottles of champagne that are served to you at breakfast. You have caviar starting at breakfast. You have pâté de foie gras with your evening meals and all the rest. It's a very luxurious way to travel. It has the advantage of making its port stops in the very center of the cities where it stops. You go into Dusseldorf, you're in the center of Dusseldorf, you walk upstairs, up a bunch of stairs on the dock, and you're in the center of the city. But you are cruising at 4 miles an hour. And many of you, and the predominant clientele that will join you on such cruises will be middle-aged and elderly people. I cannot imagine a younger type enjoying a river cruise, although they are the single most successful new segment of the travel industry. Let's go to food.
Let's go to airfares.
Airfares?
Airfares,
Oh, okay.
scrimp or splurge.
Oh, well, that's obvious.
You have no choice anymore. You have to splurge. Because of the recent mergers and other factors, prices are rising. According to a recent article by the Associated Press, prices are up 19% just in the last 2 years. So that means that almost every flight is more expensive. And also it's very interesting. The airlines have a bill before Congress, which is, interestingly enough, number 787. And they are gathering a lot of information about their customers because they want to be able to customize airfares. So if they know that you always check a bag, then they will offer you an airfare with the bag fee included. Or if they know that you always like to get to the front of the line or go to the lounge, then the airfare will be included in that. Why are they doing this? They're doing this to cut out the middleman. They're doing this to get rid of the Expedia, Orbitzes, Travelocities of the world, because with this type of customization, it will be much, much more difficult to tell what the actual cost of the flight is. And that's one of the things that has been keeping flights fairly reasonable, because you can compare the airlines. So write your congressperson, say no to 787. But in terms of airfares, good ways to save, which I talked about on TV today. You want to book 6 weeks in advance. There was a study from the Airline Reporting Corporation, which is the corporation that acts as the middleman between travel agents and the airlines. They found that those who booked 6 weeks in advance domestically paid the least. That's because if you book too far in advance, the airlines know they've got you. If you book at the last minute, they know you've got you. So they raise the prices then. Book on a Tuesday because most fares sales happen on Mondays. Don't book on the weekend. That's when the majority of people book and the prices go up then. And watch Twitter. The airlines, as I said, want to cut out the middleman. They don't want to have to pay a commission to travel agencies, online or off. And so they have these flash sales on Twitter that can be very inexpensive. If you're going to Europe, the third largest budget carrier in Europe is a carrier called Norwegian. It's been around for years. It has just made the biggest airline buy in history because they want to become a worldwide carrier. They're soon this summer, they're going to be flying to the U.S. They don't only go to Scandinavia, they go to many countries, and their prices are $100 to $200 less than the competition. So look for Norwegian Airlines.
Let me say at this point that there are far more effective methods of cutting the cost of your airfares, Pauline. And let me say that the rising cost of airfares is the greatest problem that travelers face in the years ahead. They are becoming so expensive. They are at least $200 per person round trip higher than they were a year ago. The decision by the federal government to approve the merger between American Airlines and U.S. Airlines means that for all intents and purposes, we now possess 4 airlines in the United States that control 80% of all aviation: United, Delta, Southwest, and American Airlines, each one of them dominating a particular set of routes and raising prices at their will. The primary way to avoid the impact that these higher airfares have on your vacation budget is by devoting an hour or so to the job of choosing an airfare when the time comes to buy your tickets. No longer can any of us simply call up Expedia, Orbitz, or Travelocity and go to one source and find the best fare. It now has become necessary to spend at least an hour going to 5, 6, or 7 sources of airfares, primarily from companies that are called aggregators. In the past several years, companies have emerged primarily from Europe who do not sell you tickets, but tell you where the cheapest airfare is to be had, and you then contact the airline that they have named. These aggregators consist of such strange names as Momondo.com, MOMONDO.com, headquartered in Copenhagen, and yet able to sell you a round-trip airfare between Miami and Minneapolis, let's say. They deal with the United States. There is a company called DoHop, DO-hop.com, found in Iceland, that performs the same function. There is Vayama, VAYAMA.com. There is an American company called Kayak.com. And it often happens in travel today that there is a hungry airline that has lowered its price on a particular flight. If you are only able to find that flight, which you can do by going to Momondo, to DoHop, to Vayama, to Kayak, and others. When you access these aggregators, it is terribly important to push the button on your computer screen which tells the aggregator not to limit themselves to nonstop flights. The second most effective method of cutting airfares is by deliberately choosing a one-stop or a two-stop flight to reach your destination. If you are flying to London, you no longer can afford to buy a nonstop flight on British Airways to London. You will save hundreds and hundreds of dollars if you go to London on KLM via Amsterdam. If you go to Paris on Lufthansa via Frankfurt. If you go to Rome on Iberia Airlines via Madrid. By accepting a stop or two on the way, even a change of planes, by adding 2 or 3 hours to the trip time for your holiday, you will save an enormous amount of money. You also, when you access the aggregators, will find that many of them are displaying charts on their computer screens, giving you the airfares not only for the dates that you have requested, but for the 2 or 3 preceding dates and the 2 or 3 following dates, which means that by being flexible, by being willing to leave a day or two earlier or later, you can also save hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And therefore, it has become very, very important that you become familiar with the aggregators and that you direct them to find for you the one-stop and two-stop flights, which are the single cheapest flights that are now available for people going almost anywhere in the world. Name the name.
Now?
Shall we do what?
Oh, what were you about to say?
I was about to ask you to name another topic on which we can disagree.
All right. Food. Do you scrimp or splurge on food? I would say that it depends on the destination. There are certain destinations in the world where the great food is the street food, and only the tourists are eating in the restaurants. Then there are other destinations like Miami, like San Francisco, like New York, Rome, Paris, London, where there are master chefs working. And paying a lot for a meal will give you a memory that will last a lifetime. Last night, David took me to Yardbird, which was not inexpensive. It was pretty expensive, but wow. What delicious food. It was, you would have loved it. Everything was fried, Dad. Everything was, it was Southern food, but it was absolutely exquisite. So, and it's what I will remember from this trip, besides, of course, the speech to Miami, because the food was so extraordinary there. So I say splurge sometimes.
I say scrimp, especially when you go to Europe or to a colorful foreign destinations. I have found that these famous 3-star restaurants, these shrines to eating, really don't want you there. They don't want a tourist who is unable to read the menu or who doesn't know the quality of the foods that are available to them. I just find that it generally doesn't work out, that you have a far better eating experience if you go into a restaurant that is located near a marketplace and that enjoys low prices, or if you go to a source of street foods in a great many countries, and if you go to the restaurants that are famed for their low prices, such as the Peruvian restaurants high up on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. I just feel that the decision to go to the Grand Vefour in Paris, the decision to go to one of the great restaurants in Thailand, means that you will be met by waiters and others who really don't appreciate your presence. They don't want you there. You are more of a burden to them than a help. And I like scrimping on food when you go abroad.
Should we do
So
sightseeing?
beat me. Sightseeing?
Why don't you do sightseeing? You can
Oh,
start.
well, sightseeing, absolutely. There is no worse way of traveling and enjoying any foreign trip than by committing to book a commercially operated sightseeing tour. The idea.
Wait.
I got the idea for doing Europe on $5 a day one day when I was in the Army and I was in Paris and I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe nursing a single glass of wine. And in front of me there rolled a motor coach of 48 American tourists, all of whom had their noses pressed against the glass, looking out at the life of Paris outside the confines of the motor coach. I realized that the difference between myself and them was that they had money and I didn't have money. And because if I had had money, I would have been in that damn motor coach. But because I had no money, I was having the time of my life by simply walking around Paris on my own and taking a seat at a sidewalk cafe. I believe that the only way to properly enjoy a country is on your own 2 feet, getting up in the morning and simply striking out at random into the center of the city. I cannot imagine anybody coming back from a trip having received its rewards who saw that country from the inside of a motor coach carrying 45 people. And therefore, I believe in spending zero on sightseeing. Spending zero other than the obvious admission prices to museums and the like that you will have to pay. But the idea of booking yourself to, well, we've seen it. We had an obligation to go to on an escorted motor coach tour a few years ago in Madrid. And I still remember our visit to the Prado, where we were led by like a bunch of school children by a tour leader holding a flag to keep us all together, who immediately took us to 3 masterworks that she had chosen. And at the end of seeing these 3 paintings, she ushered us to the exit from the museum, and out we went from the Prado. This is not the way to travel, and it's important to scrimp on the sightseeing function.
Okay, now I get a chance.
That's right.
I think you can scrimp too much. I think that we go to places for the reason to see things, to do things, to scuba dive, to go to the great museums. I was once editing a book on Italy, and the author told me there was a chapter and there was this famous little town in it, and what was famous in the town was the cathedral, which had a great masterwork in it, and the cathedral wasn't in the chapter. And I said, what happened to the cathedral? That was the reason you came to the town. And he said they were charging a €3 admission, so I cut it. I was so upset that they were charging this, and I said, you're fired, because it was the only reason to go to this town. Nowadays, there are special, interesting tours that are worth taking. In all of the great cities of the world, there are out-of-work graduate students and underpaid art historians and professors who are supplementing their income by leading tours. For example, in Italy and now also in France, there's a wonderful organization called Access, and they hire people who are not professional tour guides, but who are there because they are either art restorers or art historians. They're in love with what they're seeing. They demonstrate that love on these tours, and they give you an insider's point of view that you wouldn't get just wandering the streets on your own. There's another one in Rome called Through Eternity. I took a trip with an art restorer who happened to be working on the letters that the people who were on the scaffolding with Michelangelo were writing to the Pope. She was translating them and studying them, and to learn more about the Sistine Chapel, but also to learn about the social interactions up on that scaffolding, which were pretty horrific, because Michelangelo thought that the water in Rome was poison. So he would only drink alcoholic beverages. And because he thought the water in Rome was poison, he was there for 10 years. He didn't bathe. So the people on that scaffolding were writing these pleading letters to the Pope, begging to get assigned to another job. And I'll never look at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the same way again. But more, that was a little bit of historical gossip. She really also gave us insights into the piazzas that we were seeing. And some of these places can get you into the Vatican after it's closed to tourists. There are also these wonderful free tours around the world now where the guides only get paid by your tips. So they give wonderful tours because they have to. And there's also some interesting small group adventure tour companies. If you're nervous about going to Morocco on your own or to France or wherever it is, there are companies with names like Djoser, D-J-O-S-E-R, G Adventures. They used to be called Gap Adventures, but then the clothing store sued them and they had to change their name. G Adventures, Djoser, Intrepid Travel, and some that are represented by Adventure Center. And they try to be very, very green in their offerings. So they only use locally owned guest houses, no international chains. They limit their groups to 12 people. You take public transportation. You have an expert guide with you, and you have something to do each day, but you also have a lot of free time. And you meet, because these groups are all international, you're not just traveling with other Americans, you're traveling with Kiwis and Australians and Brits, and it's really fun. I took a family tour of Morocco, and on our tour was one family from Munich, two families from Great Britain, and another family who lived on 10th Street and Avenue A, which is about 4 blocks from where we live in New York City, who we had never met. So I think that sometimes you can have good experiences on tours. It just depends on the tour.
You might also want to mention context travel.
I did mention context.
You talked about access.
Oh, I said access. I meant context. I'm sorry, context. Context travel.
If I may also point out, there's another effective way of staying on a budget when you travel internationally or even within the United States, and that is to sign yourself up for an academic experience. When you sign yourself up to take a summer course at an English language university, of which several throughout the world today offer wonderful opportunities for excitement, adventure, and learning. Within the United States, we have two centers of such learning. We have St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, St. John's being the great book school of the United States, where the undergraduate curriculum consists of simply reading the 100 acknowledged masterworks of the Western tradition over 4 years. During the summer, St. John's College accepts adults of all ages without entrance examinations, without tests, without scores or grades being conferred upon you. And you go into Santa Fe and you stay in the vacated residence of a St. John's student in the months of July and early August. You eat in the student dining room, and for one complete week, in the company of two of the famous tutors of St. John's College, you read and discuss one great masterwork of the Western tradition. Several years ago, my wife and I spent a week in St. John's reading Thucydides, the Peloponnesian Wars, something that we would never have gotten to during our college days, but which was such an intellectual adventure. We returned the next year to spend an entire week reading Dante's Inferno and discussing that masterwork in the company of St. John's professors. Overseas, by the way, the equivalent of that activity takes place in Ithaca, New York during the summer at a place called Cornell's Adult University, where you can sign up for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks in Cornell studying with an eminent member of the faculty of Cornell at a very inexpensive price. I'll finish up in just a second.
I was just told we have to start the Q&A soon because we're
Okay,
running.
well, let me just point out as well that the two great foreign experiences for enjoying this are at Oxford and Cambridge, England, both of whom operate activities, Oxford calling itself the Oxford Experience during the summertime, and Cambridge calling itself the Cambridge International Summer School, which for a very moderate price will put you into residence in that college. Last year, my wife and I lived in the great Christ Church College of Oxford and had our meals 3 times a day in the Harry Potter dining room, the very dining room, this giant high vaulted dining room that you saw in the Harry Potter movies. That's where we had breakfast. And we then repaired from that to the apartment of an Oxford don, where for 1 week we pursued a course reading 4 books on Virginia Woolf and her set. We studied the Bloomsburys.
And I
let me
would have
finish.
talked about volunteer vacations, but
We don't have time. But let
we
me.
have time for Q&A, I think.
Before we get to Q&A,
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. Please forgive me,
No,
Pauline.
I was told.
On April 3rd of last year, as if a miracle had happened, the dream of a lifetime come true, Pauline and I regained ownership of the Frommer Travel Guides. And we had 7 months, thank you. We had 7 months in which to prepare our first fall list. And we jumped to the phone and we called all the best authors who had ever written books for Frommers. We told them that even though they had been fired, now they were being rehired could they create a book to their vicinity, their city, their location in 5 months, and they all did so. One of the people who did it was David Appel, who wrote this magnificent masterwork. David wrote such an exciting appraisal of Miami and Key West, which is one of the easy guides that we created. We decided to print a different type of travel guide as well. The trend recently has been to make travel guides as long as 900 and 1,000 pages in length, and thus to inundate the reader in unnecessary information in 100 hotels, 100 restaurants in a city like London or Paris. We told them to confine their books to 256 pages. We called them easy guides because they weigh only 3 or 4 ounces apiece. They are lighter than any iPad ever manufactured.
We have ebooks out too. So.
We have ebooks, and we'll be putting out a few large books a little later. But we have 30 of those titles, which you'll see when we sign books at the other branch of this.
They're curated, so the 30 hotels they will include will be hotels you wouldn't find in other places of the world. The 30 restaurants are the places where grandma's recipes are being cooked or an incredibly creative chef is working. So expertly curated information because we understand the internet exists. You know, these are the antidote to being deluged with too much information. Why don't we take some questions?
Q&As, yes.
Yes.
What about train travel?
What about train travel?
Train travel? People are constantly asking me whether they need to take a first-class train from Rome to Florence or from Florence to Venice. And I point out to them that the average distance in those areas is 2.5 hours, that from Rome to Florence is 2.5 hours, from Florence to Venice. And that is the case with most train travel nowadays. You're always going to a nearby location. So you scrimp. You book a second-class seat not a first-class seat, because you can endure a second-class seat when it's only a matter of 2.5 hours.
But you're a big fan. I mean, we believe in high-speed rail. You just look at the way the American population is growing. We are going to be drowning in traffic. Quite honestly, both my father and I were in a panic getting here because the traffic getting here was horrendous. And you guys should have trains. It makes no sense. And there should be trains throughout Florida and there are going to be trains in California. And we see what happened because of the terrible weather. Everybody got stuck. With high-speed rail, with state-of-the-art trains, people would not have been stuck to the extent they were when the bad weather hit. Yes?
Stand up when you ask the question, please.
Okay, if you can stand up when you ask a question. You have a question?
Sure. Volunteer travel?
Oh, volunteer travel. Okay, very, very briefly, a wonderful way to have adventures you'd never have. The more expensive companies like Earthwatch, you might find you work with scientists all over the world, so you might find yourself in the middle of the Pacific tagging sharks and sea turtles. With Global Volunteers, you might find yourself in Romania in an orphanage holding babies for 2 weeks so they have interaction and thus develop properly. There are also inexpensive things you can do. If you ever go to Orlando, one of the best volunteer vacations there is the Give the Kids the World Village. It was created for the kids in the Make-A-Wish program. 90% of them want to go to Disney World. They often get to Disney World too sick to really enjoy it. And so this resort was created. It has wheelchair accessible playgrounds. Everything is free for these kids. It's totally run by volunteers and visitors, and you have to apply in advance because you're working with children. But I spent an evening working in the ice cream parlor, just making banana splits for these families who have had such tragedy in their lives, and seeing their faces light up. It was the most magical thing I did in Orlando. There's also the American Hiking Society has really good, inexpensive volunteer vacations, and there's a place called Vaughan Systems in Spain where you teach Spanish business people to speak English. You pay for your way to Spain, and then 2 weeks is totally free. They give you 3 meals a day. All you have to do is talk and talk and talk and talk. But they give you wine with your meals, so you can talk and talk and talk and talk. It's called Vaughan Systems, V-A-U-G-H-N. And I've spoken to V-A-U-G-H-N, and G-H-A-N? You're right. He has a better memory than I do. I've spoken to people who have done it, and they say it's one of the best vacations they've ever taken, and they've made lifelong friends. Yes, can you stand up?
I just want to give a pitch to the second company, because there's 2 companies. Vaughan is one, and the one that we did a few years ago was Pueblo Inglés. They've changed their name. I can't remember it, but it could go Pueblo Inglés.
Pueblo Inglés. Where is Pueblo Inglés? Oh, it's the same as Vaughan?
They work together. They split apart. But they're also in Germany now.
They're in Germany.
And it was the best because you had two advantages there. Number one, you got to meet people from all over Spain. But number 2, the volunteers they had was from Scotland, Ireland,
and Australia, New Zealand. Yeah, it's really fun.
India. And they wanted those accents. And what was really interesting is some of those accents I couldn't understand.
Well, it's because they want people to learn colloquial English. You don't have to know anything about teaching. Yes, in the back?
Yes, with Rhodes Scholars.
Rhodes Scholar, you answer that.
Rhodes Scholar is the former Elder Hostel. Elder Hostel was sued by someone when they tried to change the name. They are now Rhodes Scholar. They operate some of the best tours and travel today. Usually when you are in a location where there's a Rhodes Scholar group, they are smiling and everyone else is grim. It's a fine company to use. They are inexpensive. They are usually accompanied on their tours by professors or other specialists in the theme or the subject matter of the tour, and they're a fine company. Fine company.
Yes.
Yeah, river cruise question. Last year and continuing to this year, a lot of capacity has been added to the river cruise lines. Do you see that having any impact on fares?
I don't think so. They are so popular that they do not discount to the same extent as the ocean cruise companies do. I would nevertheless book the cheaper of the river cruises. We stopped on my recent river cruise in a city in Germany where there were 4 other companies running river cruises that were all docked in the same area. I walked from one ship to the next, and for the life of me, I could not discern any difference in the quality of the accommodations. Certainly not in the itinerary, not in the sightseeing tours that were offered. The cuisine
Because
may
the
have been.
quality is so high to
I
begin
also
with,
could not
right?
have imagined how they could have served a higher quality cuisine than we were receiving. And we were on AMA waterways, AMA waterways, which is one of the cheap ones.
Oh, Emma's
and yet
the
we,
best? She's saying Emma's the best. This is the travel agent.
She said, "What about
She
that?"
says Alma's the best, and
It's the
I've
best.
always heard it's one of the more expensive
They're
ones.
they're
Dad.
one of the less expensive
No,
ones.
they're not.
That's
She's disagreeing,
All right,
and
you
I
want to know
disagree
something?
too.
But let me then correct myself. We went on a ship called Amadeus, and maybe
She was Amadeus.
I was on Amadeus, and I confused that with Ama Cruises. Amadeus already was serving caviar with breakfast. It was serving wines of several different sorts of wines. We went down the Moselle River at some point, and we stopped the ship so that sailors could go outside and buy from various wineries some fresh Moselle wines and the like. I could not imagine anybody offering a cuisine of higher quality or even tastier than we were enjoying. I would book the cheapest of the river cruises.
Yes.
What's your favorite place in the world?
What's our favorite place in the world?
The city of Paris. I can never get enough of Paris.
And for me, it's usually the last place I've been. If I had had my slides, you would have seen the last place I was, which was Taiwan, which is an unexpectedly fascinating destination. Really wonderful. Do we have to end? Okay. Yes.
I just want to know, in the river cruise, I'm usually much more adventurous, and I did Europe on $5 a day with the book in '71. But I find myself having to scale back. Do they give you enough time to look, to walk through the towns? That's my concern.
Very definitely. They get into the city at around 9 o'clock in the morning, and they don't leave again until around 6 or 7. They actually give you more time than you get on an ocean cruise.
Not all ocean cruises. Asamara, you get a lot of time on the ground.
Pauline, on every ocean cruise I've ever been on, I've been on more than you have been on. Okay.
There are certain new ones like Azamara, which has a different model, and
if
you
you're
spend
willing to pay
overnight.
3 times the amount and to go
You
to
said we
Azamara
should.
cruises. All right. No ocean cruise gives you enough time to really enjoy the ports at which it stops. You generally get off the ship at 10 o'clock. You have to be back on the ship at 4 p.m. that afternoon because it takes off for the next city. And it is not the way to enjoy a real experience
I'm
of a
seeing
foreign country.
seeing a change in this because of the number of complaints about this, and there are some cruise lines that are jiggering their itineraries to change this because it has been such a problem. So I
Many of them now spend 2 nights in Istanbul, for example, so that you have enough time to really see the city of Istanbul. But that's the exception
we'll
and
take
not the
this
rule.
question and that question, and then we have to go sign books.
The Galapagos. They've been to the Galapagos Islands.
Have we been to the Galapagos Islands? I have not.
I have not either. I've spoken to a great many people, and they point out that the ships in which you undertake these trips by reason of the Galapagos lines are usually confined to 5-person ships. They have 5 staterooms on them. They are susceptible to seasickness. They go through a very rough area of land, and if you have any problem in that regard, it's difficult to enjoy a
If you
Galapagos
don't,
cruise.
It's an adventure of a lifetime. Yes.
What do you think of the European discount airlines like Ryanair, EasyJet, and would you take them?
I do take them. What do you think of the European discount airlines? The one bugaboo is you cannot have big luggage because your fare doubles. But if you can be disciplined and carry just a little, they're remarkable for the savings that you can get. There's no concern of safety. Any airplane that is flying within the European Union is going to be subjected to the same rigorous safety standards as the bigger ones. just as like the same for any airline in the United States. I mean, air travel, it's the safest form of travel. It's really remarkable how few accidents there are. It's much safer than driving. With that, we have to say thank you and good night. We'll be signing books.
All right, folks, for those of you who came in late, we do have all the Frommer titles display on a table over there. I'm going to steal Arthur and Pauline from you so they will sign tables on the east side. And maybe we can get them back next year for Frommer's Guide to the Galapagos. I don't know. Thank you very much.